Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get started in about half a minute.
Just a reminder to everybody, this meeting is being recorded.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our June webinar, our HEAP June webinar on digital reviews. And today we have some HEAP representatives. Thomas, who's going to be giving us an update on the iHEAP conference coming up in September. And we have our area directors, Area 1, and Area 3, Katie Brown. And we also have two representatives from PennDOT who will be presenting for us today. Before we get started, I'll kind of go over the webinar schedule. We've had two already, and the recordings are up on our YouTube page. We are going to be skipping July because of vacations and doing two in August. So the new schedule is up on our website. So we will be doing August 6th and August 29th, and then we have another one scheduled for after iHEAP. So I will turn this over to Thomas now for the HEAP update.
Thank you, Elaine. As stated, camera's not working. Fun. Just turn that off. I'm Thomas Hamsky, the president of the iHEAP organization, planning the conference we're having in Des Moines, Iowa, September 15th through 19th, 2024. Registration is just a little bit over half right now, so we are filling up. I expect after the beginning of most fiscal years start for government agencies, we'll probably start to fill up pretty quickly. So if you haven't already registered, I highly recommend you do as soon as you are capable. Our hotel is starting to fill up as well. We're building quite a good schedule of events for the conference. We got lots of good abstracts submitted to us by the end of last month, and our team is working on building out a full schedule of all of the presentations that will be given, and that should be coming out. The schedule of everything should be coming out probably towards the mid to late July. So all the information about the conference is going to be coming in pretty quickly as things proceed. We've got a great schedule. Just a reminder that prices will go up at the end of July. So if you can, get in at that current price we have going on. And yeah, hope to see you in Des Moines.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to switch this over to Katie now for the introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. So my name is Katie Brown. I'm with the Oklahoma DOT. I am very excited to have Scott McMasters and Alan Melly here from PennDOT. I roped them into this because they did a presentation for ODOT on how they are using their Bentley 2D and 3D review tools. And as we move forward in our journey with BIM for infrastructure, we know that our review processes will be changing. Their demo was very helpful in understanding what future review could or should or might look like for both 2D and 3D models. And I don't know about you all, but I prefer to rip off and duplicate as much as possible. And PennDOT was willing to share the processes that they have already developed and also answer all of my questions about it. And I really appreciated that. And so I thought maybe some other DOTs could also use this information. So with that, I give you Scott and Alan from PennDOT presenting 2D and 3D Bentley review tools. Thank you.
Alrighty, thanks, Katie. Appreciate it. My name is Alan Melly. I am the chief of the digital delivery section at the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. So I'm going to give a quick brief introduction to our directive and our journey that we're undertaking here at the department, and again, share what we have learned and what we're doing. Because just like Katie said, R&D, rip off and duplicate, rip off and deploy. We try to share everything that we're doing. There's no reason for everybody to be on the bleeding edge of everything. We have learned from a lot of our, counterparts as well, going through this journey. So we like to again share with what we've learned to help everybody else along this journey as well. So in 2019, we started our digital delivery directive, and started out with the vision statement that you see here is that by 2025, projects will have the ability to be bid using 3D technology and no longer be in that traditional construction plan format. That's also our plans, our traffic control plans, our ENS plans, and so forth will all be contained within that CAD model, that digital deliverable. This by no means means that everything that we're doing is going to be, digital by 2025. We like to say this is really the beginning. We're going to have that ability to deliver projects here in 2025 that are completely digital. And it doesn't mean everything will be done in 3D. There's a lot of stuff that we do that doesn't, lend itself to being modeled in 3D or whatever. So, it's a mixture of both 2D and 3D aspects for digital delivery, because ultimately digital delivery is that transfer of information from design to construction to asset management, that whole life cycle of the project. So our initiative, next slide, Scott, is really right now consisting of 23 different pilot projects across the state. We're looking at various aspects. So we have 2 projects that have been constructed, 2 are in construction right now. Both of those projects are both bridge projects. So complete structure models, no plan sheets whatsoever. Then we have 19 different projects that range all over the design spectrum of where they are. So with that, we are piloting all of these various aspects. We've seen benefits of, from the contractors. One of the projects that we have completed actually finished a month and a half ahead of schedule. And we attribute a lot of that to the increased efficiencies that we've been able to realize with our, digital delivery projects and our implementation and so forth. But to really get through this, as we are looking, at the design and at the construction, we need to figure out how we're reviewing these projects. And that's where this webinar really comes in, is how are we looking at these projects in, early on in the design, maybe not even at a milestone review, and then at each of those milestone reviews and then getting it out to construction. How are we connecting the data? And what have we done to really set that up to make that a reality? So with that, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Scott McMasters to really go into the nuts and bolts of what we have set up and how that's being accomplished. So Scott, go ahead and take it away there, buddy.
All right, thanks, Alan. So first thing, PennDOT is using ProjectWise, as the environment for all this. So with using that environment, we have to think about permissions and setting up things, because we store all the data in ProjectWise. Now, it may be connected out to the review software and things like that, but in order for reviewers to use it, I have to make sure that I set all the permissions, the roles, the information up first. So ours is based off of ProjectWise. We're using, enterprise level for access, federation, things like that. We have 365 Synchro that we're able to use the enterprise roles that are, across the board. But then when we get into some things like infrastructure cloud, there may be project-based roles we have to do too. So it's a mix of both right now. Now there's some change coming in the future for some of that stuff, but today we have to kind of do a little bit of different setups depending on which platform we're using for which review and for construction. Now, the other thing that comes into play with this stuff is internally, we have different users at different roles. So with those roles, they might be a bridge user, a roadway user, they might only have read-only access to something. To do some of the review processes, I have to make sure they have access to write to certain things. So there is going to be pieces of that come up throughout the presentation that kind of point to permissions and making sure you get the things set up correctly to start with. Now, part of digital review is also the integrity and the access to it. So when we talk about integrity and access, you may have project managers that don't use CAD. Well, they might be using a web viewer or ProjectWise Drive or something like that to access the data you're looking at, where the CAD users are using that managed workspace. And the managed workspace comes into play because that's what controls the standards. And standardizing and making sure that the information's correct really helps as part of that review, because if you set it up the same each time, the review process is easier. So making sure that data integrity is there. The other thing is, I don't want copies. We don't want to make duplicates of things. So data integrity also means that single source or that connected ability, so that you're not duplicating information or getting different versions that might be out of sync. So as I stated there, today we're using a managed workspace. That controls it. That tells us what is being used for that project. Now we have it set up on the project folder, but there is times that we may break that down into an individual folder because we may have something that's from maybe the old workspace, the old environment, that we still want to see it using those old parameters, but we want it to be controlled still, so that, again, as we review things, as I go through setting up and looking at things, I'm using the same levels, the same naming. That becomes important as you go through the steps. So again, that's another step of this that helps with the review process. And part of that is also associating that workspace and work set, because that's stuff that gets pulled over into those web environments. Now, when I talk about associating projects, we do this through basically ProjectWise Explorer right now. Once a project is created out in Infrastructure Cloud, 365 or Synchro, we then associate the work set or the work area to that project out there. Now, I'll talk about here in a little bit what this does for us. One of the biggest thing is, by doing this, it connects that project in the web to the project in my on-prem ProjectWise. That allows me to kind of look at things like issues. Maybe there's attachments to those issues. Maybe there's images, comments. I'll show you here in a little bit that I can look at that stuff from ORD, from ORD, not just the web. So we're doing stuff in the web, but we're also doing stuff that our designers can also look at and use that connectivity, that collaboration for that. So another piece of this is the web connection. So to get the iModels and the information to come across from our on-prem, we had to establish an IMS connection. So we're using that IMS authentication to connect. That makes the data so that it's live. It's going to be a duplicate copy of what we have on our on-prem. It's not really a copy, I shouldn't say. I guess it's basically a web access to the same data. So if I check it out, whether I'm checking out the information to look at a PDF or I'm looking at some information, it's going to show on the on-prem or in the web that it's checked out by whoever's checked it out. So it is live data between the two. Now, that live data is needed for our synchronization process for review models. So when we're doing that synchronization, we want to sync what we're doing up till the date of our review. So I want it to be the same the whole way through, that it's getting updated. Everything's going to be the latest whenever I kick off the review. So that synchronization goes up until the date in which we hit the go button on the review session or the form. And then once that is done, we switch it to a manual sync so that it will not update anymore, because we don't want reviewers looking at something that's updating, because then a comment they may have made today might not be valid tomorrow. So we have to stop the sync so that the review process can go through. Now, I talked about there a second ago, forms. When I kick off that form. So what we're doing is we're using forms to do these different reviews. Now, with these forms, I can connect data to them, such as PDFs or the model. So if I have multiple things, I can put that into one form to do that review. So I may have supplement documents that still had to be in a PDF. I may have reports or something else that I still need to attach to this review, but then I can also attach the model so that I can do the issues and everything right off the model. And with these forms, we also workflow things. So we're going through the workflows using roles, and the roles basically say, okay, these individuals in each district have to approve at this stage. Once they approve it, it kicks up to the project manager and they review all those approves or rejects to say whether they close it out or finally approve it. So we have workflows and things like that that we control with this. The other thing is, as it does that, it notifies people based on their profile settings for emails if a thing was assigned to them, if a comment was left on that review, all those different things are alerted through emails. The other thing is those forms and the documents within the forms, we can do what's called issues. So with issues are what we're using to identify review concerns. So we're using those to identify review concerns. We're assigning them possibly to the project manager, who will then assign it to a designer or somebody underneath that that might address the comment or the concern. But not only that, I can make comments back and forth. So that issue's created. Now the design staff can take and go back and forth with the reviewer and say, oh, well, we addressed that this way, or we hadn't caught that yet. Let me look at this, and I can make a comment and there can be a conversation on that issue. We can even attach things to it. I can do markups on it, and it's all trackable through the dashboards. So we're using that as a way to really track things and keep track of how we're updating, making changes, and it houses all those records in one place with doing this. So if you have an attachment on that issue, it's going to be there with that issue. So with that, here's an example of a line and grade submission we're doing. Basically, I'm going to go in and I'm going to fill out a description. One thing we found out with doing these submissions too is initially when our users create them, we don't assign anybody initially. And the reason for that is because that puts it in a draft stage. By doing it that way, our users don't get extra edited or added emails that are going to possibly fill up their inboxes. So we'll do it as a draft first. We'll attach our documents. So here I'm just going out, I'm grabbing those documents from that connected environment. So this is actually connecting to the data that is on my on-prem ProjectWise. So I'm going to add PDFs in this case. And if I scroll down there, you'll see a model location. I can also identify that. That's just part of it. I didn't do it in this case, but you can see there I created it. Now it says send for review. I'm not going to do the send to review until I assign it to somebody. So if I go up to the assign to, I can assign multiple users. I can do it by role. I can do it by name. Either way. It's easier to do it by role because you may have different districts, and if you're doing a template to set up these forms, you'd want to vary based on, okay, I have this user in this district or this user in this district. They're the same role, but I don't want to have to pick their name. I want to pick the roles or have those roles preset in my document that I'm going to use every time for these reviews. So in this case, I'm just going to, assign this. You'll see it comes up to review complete. Now with review complete, this is one thing. It's a little different. This is where they have to do the approve and stuff like that, but I'm going to go out and select one of these documents. So I'm opening up a PDF. Once the PDF opens here, I now have basically an environment that can be collaborative. So you'll see up in the upper right corner there, there's two little people that has a 1 by it. That's showing how many people are in this review session right now. Now with this is just like you do today. So if you want to cloud something, you want to put comments on it, you want to put text notes, it works just like that. But in our case, we're creating an issue from each one of those. And the reason we do an issue is because we want to track it. We want to be able to have that interaction between the design team and the reviewers. We also want to be able to have this as something that if I'm a designer, I can pull it up in ORD and I can be addressing them in the actual CAD, files instead of in the PDF, because the PDF isn't the actual CAD. Remember, the PDFs are going to be a byproduct of the CAD we've done, of the model we've done, of the design we've done. So in this case, I'm just going to make it an issue real quick, and you'll see it says created successful. That's all it takes to do a review. Now, if I take and try this as a collaborative environment, you'll see here that at the top it changes to 2. So now I have another individual in here with me. Now I've created 3 or 4 different issues on this project. I'm going through and I'm going to let the other individual make comments. So you'll notice that some of these have a 0 for the little flag beside the assigned. One of them at the end there has a number 1. Now that number 1, that's saying there's already been a comment put on it. Also, when I click on the actual comment on the right side, it highlights it on the left side. So every time I switch between things, I know what I'm picking. I know what I'm looking at. Now, I will say what you're seeing as far as right now for this, in the future, I can already see changes coming. There's already things that are being developed that are going to help streamline this a little more and eliminate some of the steps we have here. But we're not there yet. So this is what we do today is we're doing these comments if we have to do a PDF. Now that's one thing we're trying to eliminate doing PDFs as much as possible with these. I'd rather use the sheet model. I'd rather use things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that here as well in a second. But again, you can see people can comment. They can be in it at the same time. They can see all that information at the same time. It's no longer a individual review. It's a review that people can add information, add their own comments. I can look at them to see what's updated, different things like that. There's a lot of capability here. This takes you away from that old day of, okay, I just sent out 10 PDF copies of a design and I don't know what the other people are commenting on. Maybe I don't want to comment or have to combine 10 of the same comments. I now have them in one place that if one person's made that comment, the next doesn't necessarily have to do it. They could put a comment underneath this saying, yes, I agree with this. This needs addressed. It makes it a lot more collaborative doing this. Now with that, those issues can be seen, as I stated, in ORD or in ProjectWise 365, Synchro, or Infrastructure Cloud. So the right side is ProjectWise 365. I'm pulling up some of those different issues. I'm just going through them, showing you kind of what ones are there. So in that case, it's the widening missing in front of the curb. Now I can look at it there, but I can also go over to ORD and through manage issues, I can select issues and there's that same issue. I can pull it up over here. I can look at it. You'll see that there's comments. So the comments are in both. The comments come back and forth across. I can add a comment here. It'll show up over in 365. So it gives that capability of communication. It's not limited and it's combining the environment across the board. Now I'm just going to do this comment and then I'm going to hit the little plus sign there. The little blue plus line is what adds it. Once I add that, we'll go back over to 365 here. And we'll look for that issue. So I can go over there. And this was all done at the same time. And one thing we have noticed is sometimes it doesn't refresh. So you got to back out, repick the issue. It's that refresh just like you have on a website. Until you hit the refresh, it doesn't show up. I could hit the refresh at the top also, but it's there. So I can look at the information. I can go to these and see, okay, when was it assigned to me? How often? I can click on it here, pull it up, look at that actual issue and the attachments on it, the comments in it. Everywhere I go, the comments are going to be the same. They're not different from one to the other. it comes across both environments. Now, this here is opening up a downloaded. So basically, if you're in ORD, the images are live in 360, so it'll pull up a model, things like that. But if you're in ORD, I have to open it as a PNG essentially. The other thing is there's audit trails. I can add attachments, everything else. There's a lot of things around issues you can do. And again, I'm just scratching the surface today. There is a lot of information I can also provide later or in other presentations. Now, let's switch from that more traditional PDF. Let's start thinking digital. So when we think about digital, you know, the old was that cross-section view on the left side. Now we're thinking today, it's now dynamic. It's now information that's tied to the model. So if the model updates, the information updates. You know, some cases I have to do some manual stuff. Some cases I'm going to automate things as I go through this process. But again, digital information doesn't also mean that it's strictly 3D. I'm going to have 2D views. But when I do these 2D views, these views need to be based off of the model. So this is me taking a slice of the model and then adding dimensions to that slice. So it's still a detail, but it's based off the model. Now there is some caveats to this that we found. Some cases you have to make sure that you do the dimension to the components versus 3D line or lines, because those 3D lines, the way they generate, sometimes it breaks the connection with the dimensions. So a lot of times you're going to be going to those solids or those components to get the dimensions to hold, so that as you're updating stuff, things come across. So let's look at a couple of those. We're going to take, and this is an example of one of the bridge projects that's in construction right now. These are just 2D details. You can see they're just slices. It's just information. It looks like it always did in a normal PDF or plan set. But in these cases, we've sliced something. We've added notes to it. We've added comments. We've dimensioned things. This is information that contractors need, or reviewers need, or somebody taking and certifying this document or this model. So these are all things that still have to kind of be there. And again, this is where we're saying it's not all going to be 3D. You may have a detail that's using that 3D as well. So we're starting to move towards, you know, these 2D views that are sheets, drawings, as a way to incorporate the details into the model and not produce that PDF. Because if you do a PDF, what's the first thing most people are going to do? They're going to print it because the option's there right off the bat. To give this a fair shake, we have to make it that we're providing the information, but still making it a little bit harder to go back to that old workflow. Now, as we do all this, one of the key pieces to this whole thing is the federated file. So when we're setting up these models, we have to make sure that federated file is correctly set up. It's very important to have the correct coordinate system. So with PennDOT, we have two coordinate systems. We have a north and a south. I have to make sure I'm the right one when I create that federated file. I'm then going to reference in my survey and all my other files. Now, one key piece here, and I'm going to stress this because if the survey is not set to active, it doesn't turn on that 2D, 3D view. You have to have that for these iModel connections and the information to come across from your native platform into Infrastructure Cloud and ProjectWise 365 and that. So it's very important you set that active whenever you get these files in there. The other thing is we're only placing the references for the model in here. Currently, we're doing typicals and things as a separate connection to make sure that our fonts and stuff come across correctly. But when we do these references, we also make sure the logical names are defined. And we're using our 4-character naming convention to do this. The other thing we're doing is a description. And these are pieces that help when you're doing the review and the iModel, because there's times that you're going to click on something and look at properties or hover on it. And if you don't update this information, you'll get master model for everything under description, or the logical name is blank. If everything says master model and everything is blank for logical, where's it coming from? You're not always going to see the name of the actual file out there. So it's important to think about pieces like that. Now, the other piece here is I have to take the 3D view and make sure that that is live nested in my view 1. So everything else, there's no nesting on, but that 3D view, I have to set that to live nesting to get my 3D information to come across correctly. And again, this is what we're using to create these ProjectWise 365, Infrastructure Cloud, and Synchro projects. Now, once this is set up and we get in there, there's a couple other pieces we're using. So we're using save views, and the save views, those help us to jump to specific points in the model. You know, remember it like it's a camera location, orientation, displays, all that stuff is things that might be easy to a CAD person, but not necessarily to a reviewer. So by setting up save views, it creates that quick jumping to saved points in the model. You know, things that might be important to an inspector or might be important to somebody else throughout the process of review. So we're using save views as part of that. Now, taking that a little bit further, we also have data visualization. So with data visualization, in this case, I'm taking my pay items. I've identified them, assigned them through item types to my pavement layers. I can turn those on and off. I can also go over and select, in this case, my base, and I can look at my quantity on the right side there. The properties are there from the item type. Now, if I go over and turn that base off, and I just have sub base, I do have to click off and come back on to the object I want. But again, you can see it switch to the sub base. There's the quantity, there's the pay item. Now, if I go to a different visualization, this case, it's going to be sidewalk in that. One thing to note here is if I pick that from over there, you can see it says varied on the right side. That's because it's picking everything that's underneath that particular item. To get actual quantities, I have to go to that element within the model. So if I don't pick the element, I'm not going to get the information. Now, some of this stuff is still things that are going to go to reports. So we don't get rid of reports. There's still some things there that you'll see through a report or through other areas to get quantities. The other thing that has helped us a lot is corridor analysis. Now, this is a tool in our toolbox, is the way I like to look at it. Now, the key piece here is this is based off of alignment. So any components associated with that alignment today, this allows us to pick. Now, I can do station ranges. I can also pick what I want to analyze or I want to ignore. So when you see this resurfacing group here is what they're calling it right now. Again, this is in preview, but they're calling it that because one of the things we ran into was with our data set, we had a mill or an overlay component in there. Well, our milling component actually went across a couple of the layers. So because it went across, it was having a tough time distinguishing, okay, what do I group it with, or do I want to analyze this for changes? Well, we know milling and overlay components are going to vary from template to template possibly. So every drop might be different. Do we necessarily want a report telling us that when we know that? No, but we do want to see it still in the sections or in those type views. So there's that ability. The other ability is to look for changes in the layers. And if you look at the one shot there that says corridor analysis settings, that's where those change onlys can be flipped on to go to things. And you can look for changes in width, depth, cross slope, elevation. The other thing is, in the next slide I'm going to show you, is that force to top. There's things that switching that off helps you with as far as this review process as well. So here, I'm just going to open up one of those corridor analysis. This is a bridge project that we're doing new approaches and overlaying the structure. So I'm going to turn off the force to top, And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can orient this, that it basically lines up with my cross section. And you can see there, I picked my cross section. Now, one thing that is kind of a caveat right now is when you first go into this, you do have to step to the first station. It doesn't start on one of the red lines. If you're not on one of those, you're not going to get the information. So today, this is limited to template drops. But you can see here, I have elevations, I have slopes, I have links, information that we had to manually do before. And as I switch between those layers, the information goes along with it. If I want to turn off one and turn on the other, I can do that. It's all dynamic. It's all based on that. If I want to switch to a different piece, it's all dynamic. And as I step through this, you see there's the buttons left or right where the station's listed. If I do that in the top or the cross section, those are synchronized. And that was another piece from the last slide there, that it's making them match up. So as I step through, whatever I'm looking at in my top 2D view is the same in the cross section view. So that's very helpful when it comes to non-CAD users being able to get to the data easily. Now, this is one thing that right now the designers are doing most of the setup when these analysis are created, so that it's prepared for the design review. It's not something the reviewer is going to have to set up. And again, that comes down to the designers may know what to pick for features, for what I want to group together, things like that, and a reviewer wouldn't know that. So the next piece, drainage. I'm using a data visualization, highlighting my drainage. Now, if I go in and I pick the inlet, and I pick a manhole, and I right click, it's going to give me the drainage profile from that inlet to that manhole. So when this populates on the bottom, it's going to show all the inverts, the rims, the sumps, my slopes of my pipes, what type of pipe it is, RCP, the size, all that's available. And as I move back and forth in that profile view, it shows me where I am up in the 2D view at the top too, or the 3D view, whichever you have it oriented to. Also, I can pick on an inlet and I can see those properties from drainage and utilities. So the information that's there is available. Now, one thing that is not available right now that we're still working through some things on is how do we look at some of the flex tables and some of the other information with drainage. That's one piece we're still trying to figure out. So again, this is looking at the information that's modeled, but not necessarily all the analytics. So that might be something that's still in a report or another document as part of this process. The other thing is, as I go through drainage, where do I have clashes? Where do I have utilities that might be impacting that? So with this, I need to go through and identify those different locations. I need to look at this stuff. So I'm going to go through, and in this case, the set A is all my drainage. The set B is all my utilities. I can actually rotate these and step through each one. So I can say clash, go to the next one. It's going to bring it up, the next one. And on this one, there was 125 clashes identified going through this. So this is something that, had we not modeled the utilities, not modeled the drainage, might not be as obvious in the field. We may have done SU, but you might have had to do a lot more SU than you needed. This gives you places to pinpoint and identify, oh, I need to concentrate maybe here to make sure where the pipe is, because that gas line is going to interfere with this cross pipe I'm putting in here. So it's giving that ability to go and look and find and identify things that might help with eliminating those work orders and construction and stuff like that. So it's helping for that, but it's also helping for the reviewers to know, okay, do I have the utility company notified? Are they looking at this to relocate this line? How are we addressing these things? Things that reviewers approving a submission might be looking for. So there's a lot of possibilities there as well. Another piece of this is Photos and Media Explorer. So think about if you're doing field work and you want to make sure that something's captured for the reviewer to look at. Maybe it's a curb ramp. You want to show what it looked like out there as they're going through so that they can kind of look to see why you did something, or maybe it's an issue you want to portray to somebody. Those are all things that we want to kind of incorporate with this. So with that, I can go out and I can add those as issues. I can add those as a photo collection form, but then there's AI in here. So there's the ability in here to also search for certain things. So in this case, electric pole. And you can see if I pick on the items that are gray down in the lower right, it's going to highlight those. So it's highlighting the poles. Now there is some things it doesn't necessarily find yet, but again, that's all part of the process of piloting and trying this stuff and seeing what we can do, what things are showing up, and how can we improve this. So it's not without challenge. There's definitely things that we're going to come across that don't necessarily do everything we need to do today, but we'll continue to add tools to the toolbox, pieces to the reviews as we go forward with this. So as far as the review, that's what all I had today to kind of show you all this stuff. One thing I will kind of point you to is if you're interested more, if you want to see what we're really doing, if you go to our PennDOT website, we have different demonstrations, videos, other webinars we've done that goes into more detail on different aspects. It's hard to kind of show everything in this one. The other thing is we do updates monthly with our business partners and our internal staff. So we have a monthly meeting that's open for them to look at stuff and kind of hear what we're saying and give feedback. But we're also doing internal quarterly webinars. So we have a quarterly webinar coming up actually this Thursday even that's going to be based on construction. So it's going to be more oriented towards construction stuff. We also do newsletters that are giving you information about the pilots. So it might be a contractor talking about how this went with their project, or it might be a designer and how the review went with their project. That stuff's all available through our website. So there's a lot more information available and out there. So don't feel afraid to ask questions, because I'm sure people have lots of questions, which I do see the chat has quite a few that we're going to get to here in a second. But again, we're piloting to learn, and part of that piloting is what can we improve? How can we get to where we need to be in the future? And one thing we have to think about here is what functionality, what do we do with it after we get past even the design review, or what do I do before I get to the design review? Those are all aspects that this process isn't necessarily a milestone process anymore. I have designers telling me they can find more through the tools in Infrastructure Cloud than just in ORD. And that's because of the way I can do those data visualizations, the way I can use corridor analysis, those different pieces. So we're using this for reviews that aren't necessarily linked to milestones either. So just keep that in mind as we go forward here. So with that, we have about 15 minutes left. So I will get into some of the questions here. One thing that I did forget to mention at the beginning, yes, this is external and internal. So our ProjectWise and our 23 pilots going on right now, there is several hundred business partners involved in those. So they have access and are using our on-prem today. So they're in our ProjectWise environment using our managed workspace to do these pilots. So that is one thing that we are doing there. Have we encountered any problems with connections to container files if someone uses versions of CAD files in ProjectWise? We did run into that one time. That's one of the benefits to the federated. If you don't version the federated file, you're not going to have the connection problem, because what it's doing is it's using the federated file as the GUID ID that it's looking at. If you version that federated, it is going to give you an issue because the GUID ID has changed, and it's using that GUID ID in both platforms to recognize that connection or that file that's being used to come across. Corridor analysis is limited to template drops at the moment. I know there's other things that are being looked at for that, but today it is limited to those drops. Now, that's something that we are trying to get a little more feedback from some of our users, because one issue with that is those template drops, unless you design it today at an even station for those template drops, you may end up with your templates not being at that plus 25 or that plus 50. So that is something you have to think about currently. Now, that is something we've raised as a concern, that it would be nice to have that information not just at those template drops, but that's something that's been raised. I don't know where that's going to go yet. Are the utilities existing or proposed? So both. So what we're doing is we are having SUE done so we can identify where existing are. So when we do the existings, we have feature definitions in our workspace for both. So they'll go through and we'll survey initially where water valves are, where manholes are, electric poles and stuff like that. That's at first maybe level C, but then they'll do a PA1 call for our state, and then it'll get marked out on the ground. That gives us the horizontal. So for us, that's that level B. To get to level A, that's when you do the SUE and do your test holes and your pits and stuff, and get some vertical to it to get the A. Now, one thing to keep in mind there is, and this is one thing that's going back and forth with us even, is when you do those SUE test pits, that level A is only good for that test pit. It could vary 15, 20 feet on either side. You don't know. So that's some things that we're kind of throwing around. How do we address some of that? But today, we're using that as really that initial, let's get something to look for those conflicts. Let's look for those clashes to our drainage. Once we get those initial clashes or those areas that it's going to say, okay, based on the information we have, maybe we have to go back out and do an additional level of SUE. Maybe we need to look at each one of those clashes and say, okay, here's something we missed. Here's an area that is a concern. I need another test hole here, possibly. So that's something we are definitely looking at there. And then whenever we get to the point we know something has to be moved, we don't personally internally at PennDOT design utilities. Those utilities are designed by the provider. So the gas, whether it's a consultant doing the gas line design or water line design, whether it's the utility themselves, they would provide us their 3D files to then bring into this environment and look at it alongside that. So we're not doing that utility, that proposed work. We're using what they give us to do the proposed in our setup.
Scott, I know there's a bunch of questions up higher as well.
Yeah, I'm just trying to whittle down through. I know where that stopping point is to go hit those earlier ones too. As built, because of the accuracy I kind of covered with that last question. Would existing utilities be modeled by using as-built? So that's some stuff we're looking at. We're actually doing some different pilots where we've had a couple different vendors come in along with our surveyors. And while we have open pits and stuff, we've collected that data using all the resources that were that day. So we might have 2 external in our survey collecting at the same time, and then we look at the data for accuracy afterwards. And some of that is, there's been everything from scans to traditional to photogrammetry, even kind of methods that we've been looking at. So that is stuff we're still really developing and looking at this time for the 3D. And that's something that right now, that as-built part is kind of up in the air on who's responsible for all of it. We're trying to also look at ways that maybe if we're doing like our highway occupancy permits and a utility comes through and puts a water line in, that it becomes down the road a requirement. So that's something that would help us for the next project that comes through. If we get the data when they have the open pit, we have the accuracy, we have the better data, we have a true as-built, where if it's a set of plans, if they ran into something in the field, they may or may not have marked it up on that set of plans. So we're looking at some of that digital workflow to address some of that as-built stuff. Going up higher here. So somebody had a District 7 question on there, which District 7 doesn't exist. That's more or less our central office group. It's not really a district. So that's why there's no District 7 on there.
We do have a hand up if you're ready
Okay.
for those type of questions.
Sure.
And you can unmute. Go ahead.
You're gonna say, Scott, there's also a couple other there.
Yeah,
Protocol
I'm
for
looking
trees
at
using
those.
attachments versus links in the workflow.
Yeah,
And then
attachments
the
seem
QR
to
code.
work better at the moment. We have done some links, but not necessarily all of them are going to be links. Some of the stuff is attachments. Now, if we link it within the web environment, the links seem to work, but if you do a link in ORD, we have noticed that some of that breaks. So a lot of the stuff, if we're going to link it or attach it out in the web for the review sessions. Now you can still do the links and stuff back in ORD, but again, that's something we're seeing is there's a little disconnect at the moment. We've went away from Bluebeam studio sessions at the moment, and one of the reasons why is we're having issues with some contractual stuff there with our organization. So that's one thing that right now Bluebeam has kind of been stepped back on as far as us using it currently. There's some issues with some of the cloud stuff for our organization. We have not looked at 4D yet. We are talking about testing some of that because that's where some of the phasing we hear is easier to do as far as the components and breaking things up. So we are looking at that, but we have not got into it yet. And with that, I say let's go to the questions from the live audience.
Thank you. This is Greg Ruby from Minnesota DOT, and really appreciate your presentation today. One of the questions I've had is, would you ever think about using the iTwin cloud model as a source of information for a contract or for deliverables as we move into that model as legal document environment, where it's the electronic data you're sharing out? And the reason I ask is it's the environment that the engineering staff are going into to validate this stuff is correct or this stuff is good. And we're looking at something like the Bentley Infotech Quantumate project, where we're going to be extracting the pay items data out of there and passing it to AASHTO, where I start to wonder if that doesn't become the box from which authority comes. Do you guys look at all like that? Look at forward, something like that?
So we are. I mean, today our deliverables, they're a DGN still. I mean, we have the information in Synchro that the inspectors are using, the contractors are looking at the details and stuff like that from, getting information from, but ultimately the contractor still needs that data for their AMG, for their equipment. So today we deliver those DGNs. Now that's one of the things that we're looking at as part of the AD CMS grant. So looking at like that IFC as possibly that deliverable to the contractor, not necessarily the iModel or iTwins, but we're looking towards IFC at the moment to possibly fill in that gap, so that we can have that agnostic data coming from whatever software we're using, because that's one thing that we're really trying to concentrate on. We don't want to limit and tell our contractors or our business partners what software they have to use. So if we go to an IFC format or something like that, that makes it that whether it's coming from Bentley, whether it's coming from Autodesk, Trimble, whatever, it can be absorbed into those other. Now I can't edit it once it gets to that stage. It's a deliverable. It's not able to be modified as an IFC. I'd still have to go back to the native. Same thing would be if we do an iModel out there. I have the information there, but I still have to go back to the degen and update it for the iTwins as well. So it's still syncing across. It's still coming across. It's still using the live data. But again, the iTwins today, it's a synchronization. So it could be 5 minutes old, it could be a few minutes old. We have to think about that too with the iTwins. Did somebody forget to sync it? Did somebody forget to? So it's still a review. It's still a process where you have a time or a stopping point that somebody's looking at that information. It's not going to necessarily update all the time unless you set it to, hey, every minute I want this to sync. But that's also not what we want. We don't want it to be all the time, because that data still has to go through those change orders, still has to go through that process that we're tracking those changes and making sure they're sealed, signed, things like that. So right now, we're not really thinking about it as the iTwin being the deliverable. We're thinking it's more a tool in the toolbox to provide the inspectors and the contractors information. But we're a little bit different too. We don't use Ashtoware. So we have our own homegrown products for the e-ticketing and the different aspects of construction. So that's all kind of going through a different system than Ashtoware for us.
Thank you. That was really quite an excellent overview. And you're kind of touching at the points our organization is trying to think about is where does it all come together and what's the best authority to share it out with? So your concerns about your partners and file formats, spot on.
And again, that's another thing too, like with Infrastructure Cloud, I can export an IFC format from there. So I have the ability to take and bring it over that way and then export it as IFC. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to be testing alongside with Trimble and Bentley and other things, is how do we maybe come up with that end deliverable? How do we use that IFC and how do we validate it? And how do we do things like that? So hopefully that'll be some good information that'll come out in the future from that ADCMS grant.
We have a hand up from Nick.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Scott. So our firm isn't involved in any digital delivery projects currently, but we want to be prepared for it, and the design review software looks really intriguing, obviously. We have plenty of ORD-based projects with traditional plan presentation. Are you using it right now on those type of projects, non-digital delivery, or do you see it mostly beneficial to the model as to the deliverable project?
So we don't currently have those in our production projects, but we are looking to go that way. And one of the reasons why is we'd like to make it that we have one workflow, one product, as far as whether you're reviewing a 2D or a 3D. The other thing is, by going with something like this, it allows us to track those issues and kind of collaborate between on those design files. And regardless of whether I have a full-blown 3D model, I may just have a survey, but that survey may still give benefit to look at certain things outside of a sheet. So we are considering using that for non-digital delivery pilots as well, or projects.
Sounds good. Yeah, it looks very helpful from a QA/QC perspective. Thanks.
Looks like we have some more questions at the bottom. So one thing with our DOT is Synchro. We are currently providing that to our contractors. So with the way ours is set up, we are permitted to do that. So we are actually providing Synchro to them. And the 2 projects that were constructed and the 2 projects that are in construction, all 4 of them had Synchro available to them, and they've used it in some aspect. Now, I will say they've probably used the Synchro control more because the functionality there is very similar to Infrastructure Cloud 365, those type things, where the field app still needs some updating. So there's details in those 2D views they can pull up out there in the field very easily and look at them. But when it comes to looking at sections and stuff like that, they still have to manually dimension those, where they can look at that corridor analysis and things like that on the Synchro control. So there is pluses and minuses right now on that Synchro side, but they're working on some of that stuff. That at least that's what we hear, I should say.
Well, that brings us to the hour. I just wanted to close out saying that we had a couple people that couldn't get in, and they had shared their registration link after they registered. So 3 people came in and they were locked out. So if you're going to share the registration, share the website to register. Don't share your personal registration link because you will get locked out if 3 other people come in. So, anyway, well, thank you, Alan and Scott. This was great information, and we look forward to speaking more at IHEAP on this stuff. Thank you very much.
Hey, Elaine,
Yep.
I see where it's recorded. Is this going to be going out at some point?
Yeah, we're going to put it up on our YouTube page.
Thank you so much.
Probably tomorrow or the day after. I'll get it up there.